relentless Arizona sun beat down on the cracked asphalt, creating shimmering mirages in the distance. I'd been driving for hours, the monotonous landscape broken only by the occasional scraggly cactus or sun-bleached animal bones. My old Chevy groaned in protest as I pushed it onward, the fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. Jackie Martin. That was the name I'd given myself 3 months ago when I left Chicago. It wasn't much, but it was all I had now. That and the car that was quickly becoming my coffin in this god-forsaken desert. I should have filled up at the last town, but the idea of stopping, of being recognized, sent a shiver through me, even in the stifling heat. It had been 3 months since I'd left. 3 months of looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The faces of the men I'd betrayed haunted my dreams, their voices echoing in my ears even in the vast emptiness of the desert. "You can't run forever, Jackie," they'd whisper. And deep down, I knew they were right. I'd been part of something big in Chicago. Something illegal, sure, but it paid well and gave me a sense of belonging I'd never had before. But when things went south and bodies started dropping, I knew I had to get out. I'd taken what I could, some cash, a few documents that might keep me safe, and hit the road. But the money was running out, and so were my options. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt the first stirrings of real fear. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I knew the desert nights could be deadly. The gas gauge finally gave up the ghost, the needle hitting empty with a finality that made my stomach lurch. I coasted as far as I could, finally pulling off to the side of the road as the engine sputtered and died. Silence descended, broken only by the soft ping of the cooling engine and the whisper of the wind across the sand. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. "Think, Jackie," I muttered to myself. "You've been in worse spots than this." But had I? The desert stretched out in all directions, an ocean of sand and rock that seemed to swallow all hope. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The battery was low, too. I had maybe a day before it died completely. As the last light faded from the sky, the stars came out in force. I'd never seen so many, a glittering tapestry that seemed close enough to touch. It was beautiful, in a cold, indifferent sort of way. I wondered if this was how I'd die, alone under the vast Arizona sky, my body picked clean by coyotes and vultures. Just as despair was about to overwhelm me, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe my mind playing cruel jokes. But as I squinted into the darkness, the glow remained, flickering weakly but undeniably there. Hope surged through me, tempered by caution. In my line of work, former line of work, I reminded myself, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But what choice did I have? Grabbing my backpack and locking the car, more out of habit than any real concern for theft out here, I set out towards the light. The walk was longer than I'd anticipated, the shifting sand making each step a challenge. The desert night was alive with sounds I couldn't identify, skittering in the underbrush, the mournful cry of what might have been a coyote, the whisper of wind through the cacti. Each noise made me jump, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. By the time I reached the source of the light, my throat was parched and my legs were trembling with exhaustion. Sweat had soaked through my clothes, leaving me shivering in the rapidly cooling air. But all of that faded to background noise as I took in the sight before me. The neon sign creaked above me, casting an eerie red glow over the dusty parking lot. The RoadKill Café, it proclaimed in flickering letters. Beneath it, in smaller text, "We serve what the road kills." I chuckled weakly. Dark humor had always been my thing. But there was something off about this place. A heaviness in the air that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The cafe itself was a low, sprawling building that looked like it had been pieced together over decades, each edition slightly mismatched with the last. Windows glowed with a sickly yellow light, and I could see vague shapes moving inside. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to take my chances with the desert night. But the rumble in my stomach and the dryness in my throat overruled my paranoia. I'd come too far to turn back now. As I pushed open the door, a bell jingled overhead, the cheerful sound at odds with the oppressive atmosphere inside. The smell hit me first, a mixture of stale grease, burnt coffee, and something else, something metallic and vaguely organic that I couldn't quite place. It reminded me of the back alleys in Chicago, where things happened that decent folks pretended not to see. The floor was sticky beneath my boots, and the vinyl booths were cracked and patched with duct tape. A jukebox stood in the corner, its lights flickering weakly, but no music played. The whole place felt frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era that somehow still clung to existence in this desolate stretch of highway. A few patrons sat scattered throughout the cafe, but none of them looked up as I entered. They were hunched over their plates, eating with a single-minded focus that seemed almost desperate. I tried to catch someone's eye, to get a friendly nod, or even a curious glance, but it was like I didn't exist. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as weathered as the cafe itself. His eyes were tired, set deep in a face lined with years of harsh sun and harder living. A cigarette dangled from his lips, the smoke curling up towards the yellowed ceiling. His name tag, faded almost to illegibility, read Clive. He gave me a long, appraising look before speaking. "You hungry?" His voice was gravelly, like he'd been gargling with sand. I nodded, suddenly aware of just how famished I was. "Depends on what you're serving," I said, trying to inject some levity into my voice. Old habits die hard, and in my experience, a little charm could open a lot of doors. Clive grinned, revealing a row of tobacco-stained teeth. "Whatever the road delivers," he said with a wink that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Burgers are good today. Coyote, maybe. Or raccoon." I hesitated, my stomach turning slightly at the thought. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and I was definitely begging at this point. I slid onto one of the bar stools, wincing as it creaked ominously under my weight. "Burgers sound good," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And maybe some water? It's a long walk from the highway." Clive nodded and shuffled off towards the kitchen. As he pushed through the swinging doors, I caught a glimpse of stainless steel and dancing flames. The heat that billowed out made me flinch, even from this distance. I took the moment alone to really look around the cafe. The walls were covered in a strange mix of Route 66 memorabilia and what looked like animal skulls. Some I recognized: deer, coyote, maybe a mountain lion. Others were wrong, somehow. Too many teeth, eye sockets too large or too numerous. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe some local artist with a twisted sense of humor. A movement caught my eye, and I turned to see a woman emerge from a back room. She wore a grease-stained apron over a faded floral dress, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. They were too wide, as if she hadn't blinked in years. There was something unnatural about her gaze, an intensity that made me want to look away. "You look like you're running from something," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious given her appearance. She moved behind the counter with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with the rundown surroundings. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Aren't we all?" It was a non-answer, the kind I'd perfected over years of dealing with people who asked too many questions. She tilted her head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It didn't reach her eyes. Not everyone ends up here, though. There was something in her tone that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could respond, Clive returned, a plate in one hand and a glass of water in the other. The burger didn't look half bad, all things considered. It was a little tough, the meat stringy, but it filled the aching void in my stomach. The water tasted odd, metallic, with a hint of something I couldn't quite place, but it soothed my parched throat. As I ate, I explained my situation, the empty gas tank, the miles to the nearest town. Clive nodded sympathetically, but it was the woman who spoke up. "We're looking for a cook," she said, her eyes boring into mine. $55 an hour. Cash. I nearly choked on my burger. That kind of money didn't just fall into your lap, especially not for someone with my particular set of skills, or lack thereof. But my wallet was emptier than I liked to admit, and it wasn't like I had a lot of options. "What's the catch?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion out of my voice. In my experience, there was always a catch. Clive chuckled, wiping his hands on a greasy towel. "No catch. Just follow the rules." "What kind of rules?" The woman's smile widened, and for a moment, I could have sworn her teeth looked just a little too sharp. "You'll see." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to take my chances with the desert night. But something about this place pulled at me, like the air itself was thicker here, pressing against my skin and urging me to stay. And if I was being honest with myself, I was out of options. My money was nearly gone. My car was dead in the desert. And the people I'd crossed back in Chicago wouldn't stop looking for me anytime soon. "When do I start?" I heard myself say, as if from a great distance. Clive's grin widened. "Right now, if you're up for it. Night shift's always the busiest." I nodded, standing up from the stool. "Lead the way." As Clive showed me to the kitchen, I caught sight of myself in a tarnished mirror behind the bar. I looked haggard, my eyes sunken, and my skin pale despite the desert sun. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the reflection behind me, a dark shape, there and gone in an instant. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there but the empty cafe. I shook my head, blaming it on exhaustion and stress. Little did I know that fleeting glimpse was just the beginning of the horrors that awaited me at the RoadKill Café. The kitchen was even worse than the dining area. Rusted appliances lined the walls, and the fridge wheezed every few minutes like it was on its last legs. The smell was stronger here, grease and meat and that underlying metallic scent that made my stomach churn. "It ain't much," Clive said, gesturing around the kitchen. "But it gets the job done. You'll be responsible for prep, cooking, and cleanup. Marge, that's the missus you met out front. She'll handle the orders and the customers." I nodded, trying to take it all in. "Seems simple enough. What about those rules you mentioned?" Clive's expression grew serious. "Ah, yes. The rules. They're important, Jackie. More important than you can imagine." He pointed to the back of the ancient stove that dominated the center of the kitchen. They're all written down there. Memorize them. Follow them. No exceptions. As Clive shuffled out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, I approached the stove. The heat coming off it was intense, making the air shimmer. As I wiped down the counters, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic on the back of the stove. Engraved into the metal were 10 rules. I leaned in closer, squinting in the dim light to read them. Rule 1. The stove must never be turned off. Even during closing hours, leave it running. The fire is the only thing keeping them out. Rule 2. All dishes must be prepared exactly as ordered. If a customer asks for something the usual way, you'll know what that means. Rule 3. Never serve food without salt. Forget. And the customer will add their own, and you won't like what they use. Rule 4. At 3:15 a.m., stop whatever you're doing and turn off all the lights, even the stove's pilot light. Stay in complete darkness for exactly 3 minutes. Do not speak, move, or breathe loudly during this time. Rule 5. If a customer taps the table 3 times, take their order immediately. Do not ask questions. Rule 6. Do not clean the bloodstains under the sink. It attracts attention. Rule 7. If the jukebox plays on its own, let it finish. Interrupting it will bring bad luck. Rule 8. The woman in the maroon dress is not real. If she orders something, politely decline. Rule 9. At least 1 meal per shift must be left on the back porch. No one will collect it, but it has to be there by dawn. Rule 10. If a customer refuses to pay, they belong to the cafe. Hand them over to Clive and say nothing more. I stared at the rules, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the heat from the stove. Some of them made no sense. Others felt like warnings disguised as instructions. But the promise of cash was too tempting to ignore. And I told myself I could handle it. I always did. Just a bunch of superstitious nonsense, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a shroud. Probably just their way of hazing the new guy. But even as I said it, I couldn't quite convince myself. There was something about this place, something in the air that whispered of secrets and danger. I'd trusted my instincts for years. They'd kept me alive in Chicago when so many others hadn't been so lucky. And right now, every instinct was screaming at me to run. Before I could dwell on it further, the kitchen door swung open and Marge glided in, her movements unnaturally smooth. "Order up," she said, her voice sounding distant and echoing slightly, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "2 specials, rare." I nodded, turning to the grill. As I worked, I could feel Marge's eyes on me, watching my every move. When I glanced over my shoulder, she was gone, but the feeling of being observed remained. The meat sizzled on the grill, filling the kitchen with its aroma. But there was something off about the smell, something that made my nose wrinkle. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. I'd eaten worse in my time on the streets of Chicago. At least here, I was getting paid. As I plated the burgers, I remembered rule number 3. I reached for the salt shaker, only to find it empty. Panic surged through me for a moment before I spotted a container of salt on a shelf above the stove. As I sprinkled it over the meat, I could have sworn I saw the grains glitter in the harsh kitchen light, like tiny diamonds. I carried the plates out to the dining area, where 2 truckers sat hunched over their coffees. They didn't look up as I set the food in front of them. Didn't even seem to notice I was there. They just started eating, mechanical and silent. As I turned to head back to the kitchen, I spotted something that sent an icy dread through me. In the furthest booth, half hidden in shadow, sat a woman in a maroon dress, She smiled at me, her teeth gleaming white in the dim light. I blinked, and she was gone. I stumbled back into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. The rules echoed in my mind. The woman in the maroon dress is not real. If she orders something, politely decline. But she hadn't ordered anything. She'd just been there, and then not. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The heat from the stove pressed against my back, a constant reminder of the first rule. Never turn it off. The fire is the only thing keeping them out. But keeping what out? You all right there, Jackie? Clive's gravelly voice made me jump. I hadn't heard him enter the kitchen. I straightened up, forcing a smile. Yeah, just a bit tired. Long day. Clive nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. Night shift will do that to you. But you get used to it. The darkness, the quiet, it becomes a part of you after a while. There was something in his tone that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could respond, the bell above the door jingled, signaling a new customer. Back to work, Clive said, patting me on the shoulder. His hand was ice cold, despite the kitchen's heat. Remember the rules. The next few hours passed in a blur of grease, heat, and the constant nagging feeling that I was being watched. The cafe saw a steady stream of customers, truckers mostly, with the occasional lost tourist. They all had the same vacant look in their eyes, ordering and eating mechanically. As the night wore on, I found myself constantly checking the clock. 3:15 a.m. loomed like a specter, rule number 4 burning in my mind. Turn off all the lights, even the stove's pilot light. Stay in complete darkness for 3 minutes. Don't speak, move, or breathe loudly. At 3:10, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely flip a burger. The air in the kitchen felt thick, oppressive. The constant hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, drowning out everything else. 3:14. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the light switch. 3:15. I plunged the kitchen into darkness. The sudden absence of light was disorienting. The sizzle of meat on the grill, the whir of the fan, even the ever-present hum of the refrigerator, all fell silent. The darkness pressed against my eyes, so thick it felt almost tangible. And then I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like nails on tile. It was coming from somewhere in the kitchen, moving slowly, methodically. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. The scraping grew closer. I could feel something in the darkness with me, its presence a cold weight against my skin. I wanted to run, to scream, but Rule 4 echoed in my head. Don't move, don't speak, don't even breathe loudly. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when the presence was so close, I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. The lights flickered back on. The kitchen was empty. No sign of whatever had been in there with me. But on the floor, right where I'd been standing, was a single, long scratch in the tile. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. This was insane. I needed to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as I turned to go, Marge appeared in the doorway, her 2 wide eyes fixed on me. Going somewhere, Jackie? She asked, her voice sweet, but with an undercurrent of something else, something dangerous. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. No, just catching my breath. Marge's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Good. We wouldn't want you to leave us so soon. The night's still young, after all. As she glided away, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was trapped. Not just by the desert and my lack of transportation, but by something far more sinister. Something that lived in the walls of the RoadKill Café, that came out in the darkness, that was always watching, always waiting. I turned back to the grill, the heat a small comfort in the face of the unknown horrors that surrounded me. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and confusion. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. The customers came and went, their faces blurring together in my mind. Some of them didn't even seem fully human, their movements too fluid, their eyes too dark and empty. As dawn approached, I remembered rule number 9. At least one meal per shift must be left on the back porch. No one will collect it, but it has to be there by dawn. With shaking hands, I prepared a burger, the same stringy, tough meat I'd been serving all night. I salted it heavily, remembering rule 3, and placed it on a chipped plate. The back door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. The desert stretched out before me, the sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. I set the plate down on the weathered wood of the porch, then quickly retreated inside. As I closed the door, I could have sworn I saw something moving out there in the pre-dawn gloom. Something large and hungry. I leaned against the door, my heart racing. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how was I going to get out? Days turned into weeks, and I found myself settling into the strange rhythms of the RoadKill Café. The odd customers, the eerie quiet of the night shifts, it all became a twisted sort of normal. But something gnawed at me, a feeling that I was missing something important. One night, while searching for a clean apron in the pantry, I found it. A loose panel in the wall, and behind it, a crumpled piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it, revealing a second set of rules. Rule 1. Never trust the first set of rules. They are designed to keep you here. Rule 2. The woman in the maroon dress is real, and she's your only way out. Rule 3. If the jukebox plays, interrupt it immediately. It's a signal to them that you're compliant. Rule 4. The meal left on the porch isn't for protection. It's an offering to keep you from becoming the next meal. Rule 5. The customers are not what they seem. Look closely. They all have the same eyes. Rule 6. If Clive offers you a cigarette, refuse. It marks you as the next sacrifice. Rule 7. Marge isn't human. Don't let her touch you. Rule 8. The stove is a prison. Turning it off will release what's trapped inside. Rule 9. You are not the first cook, and you won't be the last. Check the basement for proof. Rule 10. There is no escape. The cafe is alive, and it wants you to stay. My heart raced as I read and reread the hidden rules. Everything I thought I knew about the cafe unraveled in an instant. I was trapped in something far worse than I'd imagined. Far worse than anything I'd left behind in Chicago. The sound of footsteps outside the pantry jolted me back to reality. I quickly stuffed the paper into my pocket and grabbed an apron, trying to look as normal as possible as I stepped out. Clive stood there, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Everything all right, Jackie? You've been in there a while." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just looking for a clean apron." "Place is a mess." Clive chuckled, reaching into his pocket. "Here, have a smoke. Helps with the stress." I remembered Rule 6 from the hidden list. If Clive offers you a cigarette, refuse. It marks you as the next sacrifice. "No thanks. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to quit. Something flashed in Clive's eyes. Disappointment? Anger? It was gone too quickly for me to be sure. "Suit yourself," he said, turning away. "Better get back to work. Busy night ahead." As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just dodged a bullet. But if the hidden rules were true, I was far from safe. I needed to find a way out, and soon. That night, as I worked the grill, I paid closer attention to the customers. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. The customers are not what they seem. Look closely. They all have the same eyes. At first, I didn't see it. But as the night wore on, I began to notice. A trucker with weathered skin and a biker with tattoo-covered arms. Their eyes were identical. Dark, empty, with an unnatural sheen. I looked from table to table, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. Every single customer had the same eyes. My hands shook as I prepared their meals, my mind racing. What were these things? And if they weren't human, what did that make Clive and Marge? As if summoned by my thoughts, Marge appeared at the kitchen door. "Jackie, dear," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need you to run down to the basement. We're out of special sauce." The basement. Rule 9 flashed through my mind. You are not the first cook, and you won't be the last. Check the basement for proof. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Sure thing, Marge. I'll be right back." As I descended the creaking stairs into the darkness below, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into the belly of the beast. What horrors awaited me in the basement of the RoadKill Café? And more importantly, would I make it out alive to tell the tale? The basement air was thick and musty, with an underlying scent that turned my stomach. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with jars of unidentifiable substances. In the corner, a large freezer hummed ominously. But it was what hung from the ceiling hooks. Dozens of them, some still dripping with something. I stumbled backward, my back hitting a shelf. A jar crashed to the floor, shattering and releasing a foul odor. As I turned to flee, my foot caught on something. I looked down and immediately wished I hadn't. A pile of clothes lay on the floor, caked with dried blood, and pinned to the top was a name tag. "Jackie," it read. My mind reeled. How many Jackies had there been before me? How many lost souls had found their way to the RoadKill Café, never to leave? A noise from upstairs snapped me back to reality. I grabbed a jar labeled "Special Sauce" and hurried back up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Marge was waiting for me in the kitchen, her too wide smile never reaching her eyes. "Find everything all right, dear?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I handed her the jar, our fingers brushed. Her skin was ice cold and slightly slimy. I jerked my hand back, remembering Rule 7. Marge isn't human. Don't let her touch you. "Is something wrong, Jackie?" Marge asked, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. I forced a smile. "No, everything's fine. Just tired, I guess." Marge's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Well, don't work too hard. We wouldn't want anything to happen to you." As she glided away, I couldn't shake the feeling that her words were more threat than concern. I turned back to the grill, my mind racing. I needed to find a way out, and soon. But how? The answer came later that night, as I was closing up. A woman in a maroon dress appeared at the door. I hesitated, remembering the conflicting rules. The first set said she wasn't real. The hidden rules said she was my only way out. I made my decision in an instant, I handed her a plate, ignoring the rules I'd followed for so long. Clive's voice echoed from the kitchen, low and dangerous. "You shouldn't have done that." The stove sputtered, its flames flickering weakly. The walls groaned, and the air grew thick with the scent of something old and rotten. I could feel the cafe itself shifting around me, alive in a way I couldn't begin to comprehend. The woman smiled, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of something ancient and terrible behind her eyes. "You're free now," she whispered. But as I stepped outside, following her into the desert night, the truth hit me like a physical blow. The cafe hadn't let me go. It had just changed the rules of the game. The desert stretched out before us, endless and unforgiving. But now, in the pale moonlight, I could see things moving in the shadows, things that had no right to exist in this world. The woman in the maroon dress walked ahead of me, her feet leaving no imprints in the sand. I realized, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that I had merely traded one prison for another. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. As we walked further into the desert, the woman in the maroon dress began to change. Her form shifted and blurred, becoming something else. Something ancient and terrible beyond my comprehension. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was rooted to the spot. The thing that had been the woman turned to me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Welcome, Jackie," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "Welcome to the true RoadKill Café. Here, you are both the server and the served."